It's now my great pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker. Marty Lyons was drafted by the New York Jets in the first round of the 1979 NFL Draft. He entered the NFL following a successful career as an All-American defensive tackle at the University of Alabama, where he helped lead the team to a national championship in 1978. He delighted our Long Island fans with his flourishing professional football career for 11 seasons with the New York Jets as a member of the famed New York Sack Exchange, one of the most dreaded lines in NFL history. In 1982, while still an active player, Marty established the Marty Lyons Foundation to fulfill special wishes of children who have been diagnosed as having a terminal or life-threatening illness by providing and arranging special wish requests. Since that time, the Lyons Foundation has brought much-needed joy to children and families nationwide. The Marty Lyons Foundation has chapters around the country that have together granted more than 6,000 wishes. On a personal note, I've known Marty for quite a few years through the New York State School Board Association. We met a while ago. And I can tell you, this man is certainly one of the most true advocates of children that I have ever met in my life. So thank you, Marty, for what you do for kids. And speaking for many of you Jet season ticket holders of us that are in the audience there, no one normally brag about it, right, Alan? But every time I walk in that stadium and I look at the Ring of Honor and I see his name up there, I'm always proud to say that I know that man. So thank you for everything you do, Marty. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Marty Lyons.
Thank you, Mike, for those kind words. And it is a pleasure for me to be here today. First, I want to thank my good friend Steve Diamond for giving me an opportunity to be here. I also want to congratulate him for the Man of the Year award that's upcoming next week. And I think anytime that you are named the Man of the Year, it gives you an opportunity to reflect on just how fortunate you are, how blessed you are, what you have accomplished, the platform you have, and indeed recognize those people that have been instrumental in your life. So Steve, congratulations, and it's a well-deserved pleasure. You know, I've been very fortunate, very blessed. I've had some ups, you have some downs. But certainly the game of football has enabled me to have a platform, to have a voice, to try to make the difference in the way people think and the way they act. But each and every one of you have that same platform. Should you choose to step on it, should you choose to live your life the right way and be an example. When I got to the University of Alabama in 1975, I had the privilege to play for Coach Paul Bryant, the legendary Bear Bryant. And I'll never forget when there was 30 athletes from around the country, and all of us had the same resume. All of us were all-state in multiple sports. I was all-state in high school in Florida in football, basketball, and baseball. When I got to the University of Alabama, the guy next to me was football, basketball, baseball, track. So Coach Bryant had the best of the best. And he brought us in this big auditorium, and the year was 1975. And he welcomed us to the University of Alabama. And he said, there's 4 things I want you to accomplish while you're here. He said, number 1, always be proud of your family. He said, number 2, always be proud of your religion. He said, number 3, get an education. And he said, number 4, if we have time, let's try to win some football games. Now, when you're 18 years old and you're 700 miles away from home, this is not what you want to hear from the head football coach. But what Coach Bryant was trying to establish with that day is the understanding that if we take core values and we implement them in our lives, and we keep those priorities in that order, but number 1 and number 2 is pretty interchangeable. You can change family with religion, but they got to be 1 and 2. They got to run hand in hand. And you continue to educate yourself, then your career will always have the ability to grow. We only lost 6 games in 4 years. We won a national championship. We won 3 SEC titles. I was fortunate, become an All-American, get drafted by the Jets. I went back in to thank Coach Bryant for this opportunity that he gave me. I said, Coach, you know what? I want to thank you for an opportunity that you gave me to play the game of football, to play in the NFL, but also to get an education. Coach Bryant, as subtle as he was, looked at me and says, you know, Marty, you'll be very fortunate. You'll play a game you love. You'll build financial security for you and your family. He said, but remember this. He said, a winner in the game of life is the person that gives of themselves so others can grow. I mean, powerful words. Powerful. But you know what? They had no meaning in my life at all. None. I was just drafted in the first round, the 14th player. I was going to New York. I was going to be on a football card. I was taking that childhood dream and making it become a reality. And here was Coach Bryant giving me some advice that I really didn't think that I needed. I didn't even pay attention to it. And you get here to New York. Thank God we didn't have 6 preseason games in 1979. Otherwise, I would have lost more games in preseason than I did in 4 years of college. It was embarrassing how bad the Jets were in 1979. We didn't have good leadership. I'm not going to say we didn't have good ownership, because Leon Hess was one of the best owners. He cared about his team. We had great fans over at Shea Stadium. But we just didn't have good leadership. And anything you do in life, you got to have good leaders. Leon Hess once told me, he says, you know what? Sometimes you don't choose to be the leader. Sometimes people just choose to follow you. Meaning that you have to have confidence in yourself. Early 80s, we started to change that mentality. We started to win because we believed that we could win. We started to dominate as the New York Stock Exchange because it wasn't whether we were going to hit the quarterback. It was how many times we were going to hit him. And we got close, losing in the Mud Bowl, 14-0 to the Miami Dolphins. As close as I ever got to a Super Bowl. I remember getting that little pat on the ass, and they said, don't worry, we'll get him next year. Well, I retired after the 1990 season. That next year never came. But life continued, and you still had the platform of playing in the NFL. People would listen if you truly were the example. And in 1982, as anything, you get a curveball. Curveball in life. My oldest son was born on March 4th. My dad suddenly dies of a heart attack on March 8th. Little boy that I was a big brother to died at 5.5 on March 10th. So in a matter of 6 days, here's that curveball in life. Here's the curveball of God asking myself, what are you going to do? I gave you this platform, not just to play football, but what are you going to do? First thing I did was I got bitter, I got mad, I ran, and couldn't understand, as a 25-year-old athlete here in New York, with endorsements, living out a dream, how this could happen to me. And then one morning you wake up, you look in the mirror, you see a reflection, but you don't like the person you see. And all of a sudden you realize this is life. This is that game you and I are playing. This is the biggest challenge. It's not whether you win or lose. It's whether you take time to make an impact. Are you going to give back? Or are you just going to go through life being content? So I started the Foundation for Terminally Ill Children. I wanted to take their greatest wish in life, make it become a reality. I wanted to give them that same opportunity you and I have every single day. And that's the opportunity to feel important. That's an opportunity to look and feel like you're accepted. And so many of these kids are being forgotten about because of their illness. 70% of the kids that I work with will not see the age of 18. For those of us that are parents or grandparents, you close your eyes and you think about your own children or your own grandchildren, and you ask yourself, what would I do? How do I continue? So in the last 34 years, we've been able to sponsor over 7,100 kids. We've raised over $35 million, and now we operate in 13 states. Because people like yourself said, you know what? I want to make a difference. I want to help these kids. And so many of these kids have taken time, even though their time is short, to have a positive impact. A little boy named Stephen one day, 17 years old, gets diagnosed with a brain tumor in between his junior and senior year. First day I go to visit him. He lived in Levittown. I walked in there, at any time that when you meet a child, you go up, you try to give them words of encouragement. Stephen was wrapped in a blanket, had a trash can there in case he got sick because he was going through chemotherapy, he was going through the radiation. I walked over, I gave Stephen a hug. I said, Stephen, you know what? If you keep fighting, everything's going to be all right. And without hesitation, he looked at me and he said, I know it is. I'm going to go to heaven. So I spent the afternoon with him and I got in the car and I said, well, isn't that amazing what we can learn if we just take time to listen to some of our kids? Here's a young man dying of cancer, not worried about dying, telling me as a healthy individual that if we all have faith in God, we're going to be okay. I went back there a couple of days later. This time I took Herm Edwards, the head coach of the Jets. I said, Herm, this is amazing, this kid. The strength that he has. At the end of a 30-minute conversation, Coach Edward, he looks over at Stephen again. He says, you know what, Stephen? If you need anything, just let me know. And again, without hesitation, Stephen looked at him and said, well, Coach, can you call my dad? My dad is really the Jet fan. So Herm went over and he called his dad and talked to him for about 5 minutes. Again, we get in the car. I looked at Herm. I said, it's amazing what we can learn. He said, what are you talking about? I said, a couple of days ago, Stephen was a reminder to me that if you have faith in God, don't fear death. Today, he's reminding each and every one of us that if there's somebody important in your life, tell them so. Don't take for granted that they know. Don't take for granted that what you want to explain or tell somebody today, you're too busy, you're going to tell them tomorrow. Because sometimes that tomorrow never is there for them. Stephen died a month later. I was the first one to get a phone call from the social worker. Stephen's family, financially stressed, didn't even have money for a funeral. So the social worker goes, Marty, your name was on the list. I said, what do you need? Well, we need money so that Stephen can have a proper funeral, proper wake, proper respect. I said, how much do you need? She said, well, we really need $9,000. I said, well, how long do I have? They go, we'll give you about 30 minutes. I went, okay. I work for a company out here called Lantec. We build and design athletic fields. We do a lot for different organizations. I went in there and I talked to the owner. I said, this is the situation. My owner looked and he said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to write a personal check. I'll write a personal check for $3,000. He goes, you know what, I'll write one for $3,000 and my partner will write one for $3,000 and we're done. And people go, well, just how can you do that? See, you can always make more money. You can't make more time. Money has a value, but it's not everything. See, the values of what Stephen took time to educate me in is worth way more than $3,000. We've had so many children that have come through the door with the foundation that have a story, they have a name. But see, we live in a very fast-paced world. Monday through Friday, what are we going to do? Here comes a 3-day weekend, what are we going to do? Sometimes we need to slow ourselves down. Some 15 years ago, I was in a church in Alabama. The minister that day got up to read from the book of Luke. I was sitting in the far end of the church. There had to be 2,000 people in the First Baptist Church of Tuscaloosa. And the minister was reading from the book of Luke, and he kept walking around, and occasionally he would stop. He had the wireless mic, and he would look out in the audience, and he would say, he who has much, much is expected. And then he would read a little bit more of the sermon, and he'd stop and he'd say, he who has much, much is expected. Now, after about the 4th time of him doing this, I stood up and looked behind me to see if he was talking to somebody else. Because the whole time he was looking directly at me. Or at least that's the way I felt. Like this was a personal message. And I said to my buddy Rich, who's a minister down there, I said, Rich, how did you do that? He goes, do what? And I said, how did you get that minister just to pick me out of all these people? He goes, I did. He goes, that's your message you got to tell people. You got to explain to people. To slow down in life. Take time to realize just how fortunate each and every one of us are. How blessed we are. How we can make a difference in people's lives. Even if it's just a kind word. Even if it's a gentle smile. Slow ourselves down. He goes, and once you can get people to stop and realize how fortunate you are, then you always tell them, throw the back end on. Much is expected. We'll start raising our own expectations to where we think that there's more than 24 hours in a day. We'll be more successful not just as people, but as parents, as teachers, as guiders. You guys are in an industry of trust. People want to trust their insurance brokers. How do you build that trust? You got to get to know the family. A few years ago, I stopped by to see one of the supervisors out here, and I always have a bad habit. Sometimes it's a good habit. Always being early. I was supposed to be here today at 12 o'clock. I was here at 11:15. You get here early, you walk around, you meet people. In any organization, in any position that you're selling yourself, you're selling your product, you always got to get by the gatekeeper. And that's the person that answers the phone. So I got to this particular office one day, and I was about 40 minutes early, and I got to know her. And she said, excuse me, Mr. Lyons, you're 40 minutes early. Can I get you a cup of coffee? And I said, you definitely can. And what is your name? She said, I'm Susie. So now every time that I call, I go, hey, Susie, how you doing? Right by her. But the amazing thing about it is you get to know who you're meeting by reading the plaques on the wall. You get to know who you're meeting by just browsing around the reception area. And I looked down, and there was a brochure, and it was flipped upside down, and it had 3 powerful lines. And I said, man, this is absolutely incredible. And the first line said, to dream anything you want, that's the beauty of the human mind. Isn't that what we tell our children? Isn't that what we encourage one another to do? Dream. Man, and then we try to facilitate those dreams. To dream anything you want, that's the beauty of the human mind. The second line said to do anything you want, That's the strength of the human will. We all know that that's a fact. How many times you start something, you don't know if you're going to finish it, but you're determined to do it. I just had 40 bike riders for the foundation do the 5-borough bike ride in Manhattan in the rain, the wind, the cold on Sunday. We were trying to raise $100,000 in one day with 40 riders. We ended up raising $140,000 and everybody completed the race. And I told them, I said, you know what, it's wet, it's cold, it's windy, and you know what, we have to finish this race, and there's a couple bailout spots if you're starting to feel bad. I said, but every time you start to feel bad, think about the kids that have to go through the chemotherapy, how they have to go through the radiation, how they don't have a choice. I said, we have a choice. The strength of the human will. And the third line was probably the one that I enjoyed most. It said, trust yourself to test your limits. That is the courage to succeed. Trust yourself to test your limits. That is the courage to succeed. We all have to trust one another, but you have to trust yourself. You have to believe in yourself. You have to have the confidence in yourself sometimes to step outside the box and know that you have the support of your teammates behind you. The beliefs that you can get it done. And the beliefs that you're not going to quit, you're not going to fail. We have to explain to our kids that if they fail, it's okay. It just means you're human. The real failure in life is when you don't pick yourself up and you don't try again. So I flipped the brochure over, and much to my surprise, those 3 lines were used for the American breast cancer. Women, sisters, daughters, aunts, going through a very difficult time of their life. The words that they were being told as they faced everyday treatment for breast cancer. My message is, why can't we all use them as healthy individuals? Playing in the NFL certainly gave me an opportunity, gave me a platform, made me understand how fortunate I was. But in reality, I'm no different from any one of you. Decided to take a chance on myself, a chance on the people here in the tri-state area, so that we can help these kids. They always say that we live in a world of instant gratification. Do something good today, read about it tomorrow. Do something good today, you'll be thanked for it in a couple days. But real gratification in life comes when you make a difference in somebody's life, and you do it because it's the right thing to do, and they come back years after the fact to tell you how you influenced, how you made a difference. And it tells you as a reminder that what you're doing is the right thing. A few years ago, I had a holiday party over in Great Neck. I had about 1,200 kids there. And I was bringing the kids back, the ones that have survived their illness. And then when the kids came in, they had their siblings, and some had, gone on and started a family of their own. And this young lady came up. And she said, Mr. Lyons, if you have a minute, I'd like to tell you my story. She said, I was actually one of your wish children back in the 80s. So I said, certainly. So I sat down with her. And she said when she was 5, she got diagnosed with leukemia. And back in the 80s, if you got diagnosed with leukemia, it was a pretty good chance you were going to pass away. Maybe not pass away from leukemia, but you were going to pass away from some sort of complications from leukemia, and it was going to be labeled, you died from leukemia. She said the doctor came in her room over at Long Island Jewish and said to her and said to her parents, you know what, your daughter has leukemia, she's going to have to go through chemotherapy, she's going to have to do the radiation, and there's a good chance that because of her age and how fragile she is, she may not be able to survive the treatments. She said then the doctor paused and thought he was giving the family some good news when he said, well, let me just tell you, if she is fortunate enough to survive, she'll probably never be able to have children. She said the very next day you came in. Because see, if we lost a game on Sunday, the first thing we did on Monday was we got chewed out a little bit by Joe Walton. And then we went right across the street to Bill's Meadowbrook and we drank. You know? We were getting ready for Wednesday. But I used to always say, you know what, guys, before I meet you at the bar, I'm going to go walk in the hospital. Because the thing about walking in the hospital, those kids didn't care whether you won or lost. They didn't care. You would walk in there as an athlete, and you would walk out as a friend. I would sit there and draw stick figures with the kids. I would go to golf tournaments and drop off stuff. It just made me feel better. So I walked in the room and I told this young lady, I said, you know what, I have a program for children like yourself. I said, if you keep fighting and you never quit on yourself, I said, everything's going to be all right. I said, and when you get out, I'll send you and your family to Disney. So she looked at me and she said, here I am. Over 20 years later. To tell you thank you. You saved my life. And I picked up the napkin. I started wiping my eyes. I started putting my throat back together so I could say something to her. And you stop and realize that every good deed doesn't go unnoticed. If we take that instant gratification attitude out of the picture of life, we can be more successful. And I told her, I said, you're that reminder that each and every one of us needs at some point of our lives. As a reminder that the work we're doing today has meaning. I said, thank you. And I got up and I got ready to leave and she grabbed me by the arm and she said, Marty, before you go, I'd like to have you meet my son and daughter. It's amazing. Here she was thanking me. I had nothing to do with it. This is one of those children that God said, you know what? Odds are against this young lady. I'm going to give her back. As a reminder to you and everybody you talk to. A reminder that if a good deed is out there, you will always be rewarded. So today is an opportunity for me to thank each and every one of you, but also to make each and every one of you think. That when you leave here today, ask yourself, do you want to make an impression in life or do you want to make an impact? An impression is just one of, wow, that's a nice person, they really do. Good impression. If you make an impact, you change the way people think and you change the way people act. And the only way to do that is to live by an example and to understand that when you want to communicate, you have to connect. If you don't connect with your children, then they're just hearing words come out of your mouth and they're going, yes, Mom, yes, Dad, yes, Mom, yes, Dad. You have to connect. I tell people when I talk, I want to try to do three things. I want to try to inform, I want to try to influence, and most of all, I want to try to inspire. So today, I thank you for this opportunity to come here, stop and make you think. For those of you that were looking for football stories, sorry. You know, football was just a small portion of my life, and you know, some of those football stories are probably better left unsaid. I can tell you, I'll tell you one quick one, because everybody always asks me, I said, what was it like playing with Joe Klecko? First of all, he should be in the Hall of Fame. All pro at 3 different positions. I learned when I came in, I was getting in line. And back then, you know, the rookies, they would get hazed all the time. You know, you stand in a tape line, and the next thing you know, you got four veterans stepping in front of you, and now you go from being first to fifth. So I kind of, you know, the veteran players back then, they weren't that smart. All you had to do was outthink them. So after the morning practice, I would go in and get taped up, and then in the afternoon, I was already taped up. So I kind of like jumped in front of them. So one day I'm getting ready to leave the complex, and Klecko comes up to me and he goes, you know, he goes, you got to get a lot stronger. I said, what do you mean? He goes, you got to start hitting the weights a little bit harder. He goes, I don't have a choice in this matter. You're a #1 draft choice. I got to play alongside of you for as long as you're here. He goes, so you got to hit the weights a little bit harder. I go, yeah, Joe, I just got done. He goes, no. From now on, you don't leave the complex until I leave the complex. I said, all right. So I started to walk off. He goes, where are you going? I said, Joe, I've already lifted. He goes, no, what did I just tell you? So I went back in like a rookie and changed back into my sweats, and I went back into weight room. But what that did to me is make me understand that, you know what? Joe was the leader of the team. Joe had everybody's back as long as you had his. And I learned that early in the season when we got in a big fight in Shea Stadium. You know, coming from Alabama, Coach Bryant didn't like fights. If you got in a fight in college football with Coach Bryant, you went back to the dorm, he had already had an assistant coach pack your bags. You were just picking them up to go home. So fighting was out. Well, we got in this big fight, and I went in there and pulled Joe Klecko out of the pile, and we get back to the huddle, and he politely, I'm going to change the language because there's a lot of ladies here. He said, don't ever do that again. He goes, you either fight with me or you leave me blank alone. And from right then and there, man, I knew I had a partner. I knew that if there was a fight to get into, I had Joe's back and he had my back. But that was the life in the NFL. So I'm more into telling, or more trying to give direction in the game that you and I are both playing. So that's the game of life. So I am truly blessed. I think that if you stop and you realize how fortunate you are, and you realize that you can make a difference, even a kind word, it goes a long way. I know some of our kids that are in wheelchairs, they always say, you know what, when people walk by them, it's another day that they're invisible. So hopefully that we can all make a difference. Hopefully we can all make an impact. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Marty. Okay, that's all we have for luncheon this afternoon. I want to thank Ocean Harbor Casualty Insurance Company for sponsoring the luncheon today. And of course, AIG for sponsoring our speaker, Marty Lyons. Your support is greatly appreciated. Please help yourself to the Ice Cream Sundae bar at the back of the room. Compliments of Mustang General Agency. We appreciate their continued support. We also want to thank Bank Direct Capital Finance for sponsoring the entertainment this afternoon. Singer, songwriter, Mark Newman. So thank you for that. The major grand prize winners will be announced shortly, so please stick around. You could walk away with some extra cash. You can use it in Atlantic City. Coming up June 4th, don't forget about that, June 5th, 6th. Session begins at, the education session begins at 3 o'clock this afternoon in the terrace room. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful afternoon.